Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Today I'm very happy to welcome Republican Congressman Brad Knott from North Carolina's 13th Congressional District. Congressman, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
I want to start off by talking about the reconciliation bill with you. This is obviously the big push by Republicans in the House and the Senate to pass large chunks of the president's agenda. Where do we stand right now? Can you sort of give us an update? I know people are anxious to get a framework so people can see what's in it.
Absolutely. And, I've had meetings even today with some of the House leadership. We've been in meetings since we got into office, even before we got into office. And before we got into office, and then shortly afterwards, we had that little 2 week window before the president arrived on January 20th. Uh, it was very clear to me that folks had been hard at work for months and months leading up to the 119th Congress. And it's very much a continuation of what we saw over the last couple of years, what the campaign was about, being better stewards of your tax dollars, being wiser with the regulations we seek to pursue, and really trying to guard the American economy and the American system at large with a more robust fervor. And American citizens, legal immigrants, we have the finest economy in the world. We're trying to steward leadership well. We're trying to protect our markets. And I can tell you that there is a very, very enthusiastic and optimistic energy right now in the House GOP. The president has gotten involved, the vice president has been involved, and we are really trying to shore up the tax bill. We're trying to make it permanent. We're trying to give American businesses the surety they need to look forward over the next 10 years plus. We're trying to prevent illegal immigration from becoming a burden on our healthcare system, on our educational system. We're trying to shore up our law enforcement capacities to protect Americans and those who are most vulnerable. So it's going to be a very far-reaching bill filled with common sense and needed policies. And I expect that we'll have a very, very robust discussion about specifics here in the next couple of days. But lots of movement afoot, and we're excited to get there.
Let's talk about the border security and immigration provisions. That's expected to be rolled into the reconciliation as well.
Sure.
Given your experience as a former federal prosecutor, talk to us a little bit about what we're seeing is ICE right now targeting these dangerous people, gang members, etc. Talk to
Yeah.
us a little bit about your experience in this area.
My experience in this area was firsthand. I was a federal prosecutor under the Obama administration. I was a federal prosecutor under the Trump administration, and I was a federal prosecutor under the Biden administration. And what I saw under the Biden administration, it was unlike anything that most people could imagine. There was a deliberate effort to deconstruct any enforcement at all at the border. And we see the effects of it, right? I mean, drug overdose deaths have skyrocketed. Addiction levels have skyrocketed. The availability of dangerous, addictive drugs that are designed to cripple people, they're all over every street corner. And not just that, but we see also very problematic effects, such as the huge increase in known terrorists who have crossed the border, known violent gang members who have crossed the border. But perhaps the most troubling thing that I saw was there were vast swaths of the border that the Border Patrol was simply precluded from enforcing. When you have these types of policies, it's sort of the chicken and the egg metaphor. Law enforcement is overwhelmed at every level. They get stretched too thin. And then more criminals, more people crossing over illegally are incentivized. They can come here without any resistance. And so you have this very problematic circle that took place over the last 4 years. Law enforcement was stretched too thin, more criminals come. Law enforcement is stretched even more thin, more criminals come. And that's when you see really outrageous things like entire complexes being taken over by violent gangs here on American soil. Cities like New York City and Philadelphia, where you have entire blocks that are just replete with examples of drug addiction, of paralysis, of sickness, of violence, of crime. Meanwhile, those people's governments are housing illegal immigrants. We have school systems in rural North Carolina where close to 50% of the students do not speak English. It's outrageous. And the toll on local economies, the toll on local resources, It is spiraling out of control, much less our national resources. But every corner of our country has felt the effect recently of the open border and the willingness of the Biden Harris Mayorkas crew to welcome anybody, regardless of why they are coming to the United States, even outside the law. And they force you and me to pay for it. And it's been a terrible, terrible thing to see. I saw it as a prosecutor, and it's ultimately what prompted me to run for Congress. We can't keep doing it, and hopefully, we're going to be able to stop it.
Let's talk about the cartels for a minute because President
Mhm.
Trump has designated them terrorist organizations, as I
Yeah.
think most people would agree is correct. What do you think we can expect their reaction to be to increase border enforcement? I mean, our men and women who serve on the Border Patrol, you know, people are worried about their safety now and how the cartels are going to react.
The cartels are a very sophisticated, very broadly speaking, of course, the cartels are a very sophisticated group of people. They have an international reach. They have a very, very in-depth infrastructure, not just in the United States, but all over South America. The cartel have penetrated very, I would say, benign seeming industries like farming, like shipping. They have a very robust business plan in the United States and Canada. They supply folks in Eastern Europe, Western Europe. They have supplies in the Middle East. I mean, they are an international group. They penetrated governments. They penetrated law enforcement agencies. They have penetrated the height of power wherever they operate. And that's no different here in the United States. They know full well that they have to have infrastructure in the United States to quote, quote, effectuate their business. Their business is whatever sells drugs, sex traffickers, whatever it may be, they're willing to do it, firearms. And when they create an addicted American, they create a customer. That's what's so sickening about it. And we have over 100,000 Americans who have died just from one drug that comes up from the southern border, fentanyl. Not to mention those who die from cocaine, not to mention those who die from methamphetamine, not to mention those who die from heroin, whatever. Fentanyl, just 100,000 people. You got to ask yourself if 100,000 people died from airplane crashes, what would our response be? We would ground every plane right now to fix the problem. And, for the last 4 years, tens of thousands, almost 500,000 people from fentanyl have died. That excludes addiction. People have lost their lives from addiction, but people who have actually died, almost 500,000 people, and no action was taken. So right now we have a very real all hands on deck moment, and categorizing these folks as the wretched, evil people that they are, which is what they are. They will sell your child a lethal dose of fentanyl for $1. I'm sorry. That's terrorist activity. You look at Kensington and Philadelphia, you see zombies as far as you can see. People whose lives have been hollowed out because of the dangerous drugs that have come up from the cartel. It's far, far past time that we treat the cartel for what they are. They are a very serious geopolitical threat to the United States. And if they could pull every dollar out of this country, even if it left us in shambles, on fire, and in the grave, they would do it. So the time for action is now. We must treat them, like I said, with seriousness, with focus. And the fact that the president came out in the first week, designated them as terrorists, I think is a very good first step. But they're not going to go anywhere fast. They're entrenched. They're smart. They're vicious. They're evil. They will sell you a child just as easily as they would a box of avocados. And again, I saw this firsthand, and we need to proceed accordingly.
Well, luckily, as we get more operational control over the border, hopefully, we'll see a decrease in things like the drug deaths and the fentanyl coming across. But I want to move on and talk about another thing, which is the Department of Education. So
Yeah.
President Trump is expected to sign an executive order. I don't know if dismantling is the right word, but sort of farming out some of its current responsibilities. This is something that Republicans have been fighting for pretty much since DOE opened. What do
Yeah.
you think about this? What's the right way to approach this?
Well, Brent, we have $36 trillion in debt, right? Our debt is becoming insurmountable. We have got to start thinking practically about ways to save money. The budget for the Department of Education is almost $100 billion per year. And I ask every one of your listeners, the simple question: what does the Department of Education do that we cannot do locally? Not many people know.
Right.
And in my personal opinion, the model of the Department of Education is to extract dollars, literally, from local communities, fund a massive bureaucracy, 100 billion, I think it's 85 billion, but 85 to 100 billion dollars per year here in Washington, D.C. And then they farm out whatever is left back to the states for various incentives or niche programs that could be better done locally. So I would be all for shutting down the Department of Education and returning those dollars on a per capita basis back to the states. Thomas Massie put a bill on the House floor, or he's going to if he hasn't already, that defunds the Department of Education. I'm all for it. Again, to all the listeners out there, what does the Department of Education do that could not be done locally? And that's the question that we must ask. And if the answer is nothing, we should shut it down and save those dollars. Let Americans keep those dollars. We cannot afford to keep throwing around $100 billion here and there with no accountability. So again, I applaud the president for leading well in this area and attacking a department that should be left to the local level.
And the other thing too, I think that people would know is that we have all this money, as you said, and upwards of 100 billion being spent with little return on our investment. Kid education is not improving for kids, at least reflected in the test scores, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was terrible. And again, not to keep beating the same drum over and over, but we must attack the deficiencies in our educational system. And when we open up our country to anyone who wants to come here illegally, and we allow them to go to our schools and we allow them to take part in our various educational programs, it cripples the quality for Americans. And we must do everything to protect each American child's right to a competitive, sound education. And when you have a classroom that's got 9 different languages that are being spoken, Americans are going to be left behind. That's why American public school systems, by and large, have fallen well behind the average in the industrialized world. And that's why people with means opt out of public school systems. They go to private schools. And unfortunately, that is a terrible predicament right now. Again, because we have been derelict in our duties. Those who cannot afford to do so are trapped in state schools. And we have got to think long and hard about how we are going to service the Americans who have been left behind by our foolish policies. And again, illegal immigration helps nothing and it hurts everything, including education. So again, I applaud the president. The Department of Education is a burden on most, if not all, of the students in this country. Our border policies have hurt every student in this country, and he's leading well on both fronts.
Let me ask you about the work that Elon Musk and his team is doing so far at Doge.
Yeah.
What are your first impressions? Because they're getting a lot of pushback from Democrats on this. A lot of it's scare tactics. A lot of it is information coming to light that they don't want the taxpayers to know. But how would you categorize his work that he's been doing?
You hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of fear mongering and scare tactics, but all that Elon Musk is doing right now is what President Trump campaigned on doing, and that is to run an effective executive branch that guards your tax dollars. When you go down and look at what the program of the day, USAID, they were spending money on disgusting things around the country. Excuse me, around the world, not just the country. Things like transgender operas, transing children in South America, spreading to there's just meaningless, wasteful dollars all over, not just South America, all over the world. And when you take a look back, when you take a step back and look at the United States, there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who are suffering because of inflation, because of various things that have happened to them beyond their control, whether it's the loss of a child from overdosing, whether it's a hurricane. In my home state, dozens, if not hundreds of people are still waiting on the first hint of assistance from the federal government. And when we are blowing hundreds of millions, if not billions and billions of dollars around the world, President Trump is exactly right. We need to audit these programs, shut them down if they're wasting, and if they're not helping the United States citizens, we need to rework them. So these scare tactics, I think, are a response because the president and Mr. Musk they've hit a nerve. The Democratic Party knows that appropriated tax dollars have gone a long way to further their personal and political interests. And the time for that has stopped. And when the light is shown on where these dollars have gone, the opinion is going to swing back in a mighty way, supporting what President Trump is doing.
One of the things I often ask myself when I look at issues is what would our founders think of this? And I think about, looking at this issue, our country was founded on a tax revolt, right?
Yeah.
Because they placed a tax on things like sugar or molasses or whatever, stamp, whatever it might have been. And I look at where we stand today with our tax dollars and probably how disgusted the founders would have been at what has happened.
I think that they would be disgusted just at our tax system, Brendan. I think they'd be disgusted with the full throated embrace of using our government to enrich themselves at the expense of the American public. We see that with the solidification of the last 4 years, where the Department of Justice was weaponized not just to prosecute President Trump, but to harass and prosecute people who were, willing to blow the whistle on certain things like transing minors. We saw people who were praying outside of abortion clinics being prosecuted. We saw pro-life folks' homes raided in front of their children. These are things that the founders would have been absolutely outraged by, and the Democratic Party stood idly by. And it's something that I don't understand, but it's the same vein. Leaders in Washington will continue to enrich themselves and use tax dollars unwisely until we have folks like President Trump who take that threat very seriously and want to reform it. I know from personal experience now that the GOP, those in the House, those in the Senate, and those in the administration, are working day and night to become better stewards, to put in programs that are more accountable, more transparent with the American taxpayers. And that's really all that the president and Mr. Musk have done. They've turned the light on. How many people knew that we were spending tens of billions of dollars for leftist programs around the world? I sure didn't until the president turned the light on. But I'm outraged by it, and I think most Americans are too. And we need to get back to common sense, and that's where we're headed.
All right, Congressman. Well, I think we should end things there. That's a good note. But I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come onto the show. And I wish you and your colleagues the best of luck as you plow through your work there in D.C. and do the work of the American people.
Thank you so much. Great questions. I really enjoyed it. And if we can ever help you out, just let us know. All right.
Thank you, sir.